Hello, fellow seekers of the truth. I'm Phillip J. Watt, and this is the Conscious Society YouTube channel. Our guest today is a man who I hold great respect for. He brings sexy to conspiracy. His name is Greg Carlwood, and his podcast, The HigherSide Chats, is a several-year-old adventure through the mystery, magic, and madness that makes up the human experience at the start of the 21st century. He interviews an array of guests and offers the audience a unique synthesis of ideas that many would consider off the charts crazy. But he does so without warping your vision with any particular ideology as absolute fact. So with respect for your sovereign space to make up your own mind, his poetic language and way with words is why so many people have been attracted to the higher side and why so many people keep coming back. Greg, it's an honor to have you on the show, brother.
Hey, man, much appreciated. Glad to be here.
Now, as you may have guessed, I wrote that introduction as a bit of a reflection on how you do it yourself. You really have a beautiful way of summing up the information that is going to be in your interviews, as well as wrapping it up too. You're very honest, and you have a good critique of the material. You don't just blindly believe what is going, what the guest is saying, and they really are quite brave to come on the program sometimes, because you do have an honest approach to the information presented. So kudos to you, mate. It's a great podcast, and many more people should get involved. So
thanks, man.
In that light, let's just have a quick intro to who the real Greg Carlwood is and what the high side is about.
Well, I mean, I've always been interested in alternative stuff and conspiracies. I was a bit of a rebel as a kid, and liked punk music and all that stuff. So I was always looking for an excuse to validate kind of my position. And lucky for me, it is not hard to dig up dirt on the puppet masters. And that's kind of what got me started in conspiracy, and also comedy. I used to love guys like George Carlin and Bill Hicks, and I'd hear Bill Hicks make these little references to certain things, and like the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and then I would look that up, or he'd reference Terrence McKenna, and I'd be like, well, who's that guy? And then I'd go down that rabbit hole. So a lot of it came from comedy, and a lot of it came from just being a bit of a rebel and looking for validation that there was something to rebel against.
Well, that there is. The entire mainstream narrative and perspective is so diluted on so many levels, and once you start exiting from that matrix of control, of mind control, you move into the alternative views, and even there's a lot of false rabbit holes and psy-ops and all these sorts of conflicts within the alternative media and alternative perspective too. So that's what I like about the show, that you put together some of there's almost alternative views, and then there's extra alternative views. That's sort of what you do in your program, where personally on the Conscious Society, I've really tried to be a bridge between the mainstream and just the alternative. I don't go too far down the rabbit hole, because I really want it to be, applicable or relatable to those who might just be waking up. But this is what this podcast is about. I really want to start exploring the extra alternative views and what sort of ideas and people there are who have devoted so much of their time and energy to uncovering the truth in different ways. So before I move on to all of that, I did hear a podcast with you, I think it was a couple of years ago, that you said you were considering having a crack at meditation. Have you got onto that yet?
I'm too ADD for meditation. I try, but when it comes to altered states of consciousness, I usually take a chemical approach. And some people are not huge fans of that. Some people think it's better to do it naturally. I've got a good friend. He's big into meditation, and we've talked about similar experiences that he's had naturally that I've had on mushrooms. And we've just agreed, he likes to wade into the waters and I like to jump off the diving board, but we both are getting wet. And so, yeah, it's just meditation. I can't get that into it. I mean, I don't know what it is. Maybe if I'm really stoned, then it's a lot easier to concentrate on the nothingness, but it's difficult, man. And I mean, I understand why so many people don't do it. And I think that our society is kind of geared to make meditation difficult. I mean, when you're in this Rockefeller, Rothschild 9-to-5 reality, just trying to get out of your cubicle and get back home through the endless traffic, it's frustrating. There's always something to think about, bills that are due, do the kids have a soccer game tomorrow? I mean, whatever it is, it's very difficult to actually practice mindfulness, be in the moment, and dive deep into meditation. But I'm very convinced that there's serious value there.
Oh, absolutely. I've spent considerable time writing about how we actually all do meditate anyway. If you're getting stoned, you're changing your brainwave state. You're probably in an alpha brainwave state when we're focusing on a singular thing like running or even this conversation. We're changing our brainwave state, and we're able to start experiencing some of the subconscious activity of our minds. And really, that is what meditation is. It's not just about focusing on nothingness. It's also about identifying some of the traumatic pathways of the mind and doing some self-healing and development around how we're not just wired physically, neurologically, but also how we're sort of designed conceptually as well. So we all do bloody meditates. It's just whether or not we have a focused meditation approach in life. But all right, you've mentioned a couple of big sort of picture things already in terms of the matrix of control. You've got all these different types of families and ideologies and potentially energetic influences that are really having an impact on the shaping of not just the minds of the masses, but also the system itself. So I think we can sort of agree that from a basic level, there is a paradigm of control. There is a resistance to it in terms of the many grassroots movements and people who just want to connect back with their health and nature and family and just really get away from this materialistic, consumerist sort of, I guess, self-centered sort of system that is really occupying and distracting people from connecting with reality, with how life really is and how easy and simple it can be. So I do want to explore that throughout this podcast. But on the other side of that, on the bright side of the fright side, there's also an amazingly reverent and inspiring reality, this connection with conscious with each other, with reality, the exploration of the mind and the heart, and really connecting with all this magic that really is a part of this duality that we're finding ourselves in. So when a lot of people move into the conspiracy side of things, they forget to really look at the magic as well. Is that something you found?
Definitely with guests, I would say. Some of them are very compartmentalized in their research. And I mean, I think that bringing the magic in to the HigherSide chats has been one of the things that has made it so successful, or at least has excited people, because they're used to certain programs in the alternative media that really leave that off the table. And so people have been excited to get into a lot of that stuff. In terms of, when we're talking about real magic, Gordon White has been pretty much my favorite guest. I've had him on like maybe 4 or 5 different times now, but he's written a couple books. He's a chaos magician from London. And I just think his analysis is great, because a lot of people, they'll try to take certain things like synchronicity or, just major coincidence. When you dive into conspiracy research, you'll see some of these things. And he introduces the idea that there are other forces at play. There are supernatural forces, call them interdimensional, call them spirits. There are things that our mainstream society does not take into account, and they influence reality. They kind of create these odd coincidences. If you've ever had them in your life, you probably would recognize that there isn't great language to talk about it. It's always somewhat clumsy. But predictive programming is a good example for conspiracy, where people look at references to 9/11 in mass media and music, and they say, well, is there some guy in a basement somewhere out in Hollywood like coding all this stuff in? Well, that's one idea, but that's kind of unlikely. Another idea is that there is something about major events that reverberate through, maybe, to use a buzz term, the morphogenic field or the collective unconscious. or this third option of otherworldly entities, non-human logics that actually kind of create art with our reality, as if our reality is the paint with which they come up with these little threads. And it's odd that they sometimes play out that way, but it's Gordon White who's really kind of brought that to my attention and taken me out of this like super hyper controlled conspiracy mindset where it's only people involved. I think there's other entities involved, and I don't think they're always even aware of each other, the different power centers. And I don't know, he's just a great guest when it comes to magic. He's got a very modern approach to understanding it. And, you know, I think it's very provocative, the idea that you can contact entities, and he's taken me down those roads. And it's just interesting, man. It's fascinating. And I think magic is a topic that is usually only talked about in terms of, you know, what the elite might be doing, what these nefarious puppet masters in the basements of Masonic lodges might be conjuring up. But the way I look at it is we're playing a game, and I want to know the rules of that game. And if there are elements to it that have been kept off the table for us, I don't want to be afraid of those elements. I want to learn how to embrace them and use them to my best advantage, as everyone should. I mean, you only have one life to live, and you can hang out in the doom and gloom area and just say, well, you know, the global elite are screwing me. I'm never going to get out of this job. I'm a debt slave. I'm eating GMO foods. My kids are vaccinated. They're getting autism. I mean, chemtrails are in the sky. You can have this only focus on the negative attitude, or you can kind of try to look at things from the magical perspective and kind of use those tools in your repertoire as well, because so many people have left them out, and I think that's done on purpose.
Absolutely. The false and true sort of synchronicities and the dissection between those two are really hard to ascertain when you're going through your own experience. So I completely agree. When it comes to opening up the conversation around multidimensional, trans-terrestrial, whatever you want to call it, these other energetic influences within our physical or so-called physical realm, I've had my own experience where I was in a particular country, had a particular substance, and went through a journey where I went through a wormhole, found myself in what may be considered another dimension, split into about 10 or 12 layers, and met what would be what I considered at the time the Matrix makers. And I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel any threat from them at all. In fact, one of these entities held out their hands. I shook it. It said, "Nice to meet you," telepathically to me. There was a hybrid standing next to it, which I didn't really engage with. I still had, a bit of ego, a bit of fullness around me because of connecting with my sense of self and having an internal dialogue around what was going on and thinking, where the fuck am I? Like, this is off the charts. And
what kind of hybrid? A human alien?
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I was like, yeah, nice to meet you too. All telepathic. And it said, don't wait so long to come visit next time. And then my 10 or 12 layers collapsed onto each other. I actually had several perspectives at the same time as well. So I remember seeing from the first layer all the way through to the last layer, and then collapsed all them and went straight back out through the wormhole and sat up and just went, fuck, like, what just happened? And that was a very real experience to me. It could have been all illusory. Could have been, some of it could have been illusory. None of it. Who bloody knows? But it certainly opened up my connection to, I guess, believing it's possible that there is a whole other realm of intelligence that are just right next to us. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing you had such an experience. I've had similar ones myself, but they are kind of necessary, because 5 minutes before I had my first trip outside of this reality, I was a pretty confident atheist. And then as soon as it happened, I was the first step. Well, what chemical did you use? Let me ask. DMT. Okay, yeah, that's a heavy hitter. I've been down that road, but the first one that did it for me was salvia, which I don't hear all that many people talking about. But I smoked salvia. Thought it was going to be just a simple little goofy thing, and the first step was to completely black out. I had no reference that I had just smoked anything, and I was now outside of my body. And the first thought was, this is completely natural. This is something I do all the time. This is my truer self, even though I'm outside of the body. And it's just like, it's hard to explain, why you get the feelings that you get, but that is exactly how it felt. Full confidence that I had been in this kind of state before. And yeah, then I met these two entities, one male, one female, and they both had a certain kind of energy. And the guy was telepathically very excited, like, oh my God, I can't believe you're here, man. This is awesome. Look around, you're in our realm. Like, this is pretty sweet. And the female was a lot more cynical. She was like, why are you getting him all jazzed up? He's not going to be here long. This never lasts. He's going to be gone as soon as he's here. There's really no point in getting all worked up. And I was just kind of observing these two different juxtapositions of attitude about what was happening. And then I could look down on my body and I saw my friends like kind of shaking my body, and I was like, yeah, I'm clearly not there, and that I understand why you guys are freaking out. And then I just had this thought, like, I could go back and comfort them, but if I do that, I'm probably not going to be back here. Or I can just let them deal with the body. Like, that's how much disregard I had for my body. It really did feel like a jacket that I wear half the time. Like, you throw a jacket over a chair and you're like, whatever, I'll get it later. That's how I felt about my own body. So I came back from that, and that was the moment I was no longer an atheist. I was like, this is not all there is. There's definitely more. There are other forms of consciousness. And, you asked me about meditation, which I really can't get into, but magic has been my approach to trying to interact with that realm in a sober way, as opposed to just these heavy hitting chemicals. But I think all those things are wrapped up into the same, and they're all trying to do the same kind of thing. And it's all the stuff that's been quarantined from us for so long.
Yeah, I think you described there in terms of the magic in that sober, or, whatever, just a clear state of mind. There has been an explosion in neo-shamanism and the transmutation of energy and the play with energy right throughout all the different types of cultures. It seems to be, an experience that is basically human in nature, and one that is sort of becoming, I guess, the next phase with playing with the energy of our world. But it's no wonder that we've struggled to explore these sorts of experiences and perspectives, because we are bombarded with a matrix of control that is chemically rich. It is distracting us on so many levels. There's so many psy-ops and false flags and distractions and all these things that keep us in a state of fear, and really not ready to enter into an agreement with yourself, a contract with yourself to go elsewhere, to experience something beyond the veil that we've been trained to believe in from such an early age. Mm-hmm. So with all that noise coming from, even in the alternative media, I mean, I don't know who's who. You got David Wilcock and Alex Jones and Snowden and Assange and all these global collateral accounts, and you got all these shills. I don't know what's what, what, if it's a real problem or if it's a part of the problem, reaction, solution. I have no fucking idea. At the end of the day, I'm not really willing to commit to any true truth about it, because I really don't know. And I think that's what you've done on your channel, is to really help explore the different stories without giving anybody this is a perspective that this is the way you must be thinking about this sort of information. So let's get into that a little bit. I know 9/11 has been done over and over and over again, and mm-hmm. clearly the official story is a bunch of bullshit. They've just released the 28 pages, but in a redacted form. I think it was only the last 24 hours. But one thing that I found really important was your interview with, I think it was Judy Wood,
yes,
regarding the dustification, not the demolition of the tower. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Judy Wood, she's a very well-researched guest I had not long ago about 9/11. Her premise, well, she wrote a book called Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. And she is a scientist who wants to be very methodical about what she's looking at, and she's literally looking at where did the towers go. She doesn't want to hear about planes, doesn't want to look at the Pentagon. We're trying to focus on the Twin Towers. And on that day, I was not much of a conspiracy theorist yet. I was rebellious, yeah, but there wasn't really anything in my life where I was like, okay, this stuff has now been taken out of the abstract and is in the real world. You know, it was a lot of vague, like, you know, cops are pigs. You know, the authorities always trying to crush my creativity. But when 9/11 happened, I was like, this is now a real event, and this does not look right on TV. I just didn't feel right, and I didn't have very many friends I could talk to about it. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who are in this realm now might have similar experiences where you're looking at it, it doesn't look right, but it's like very taboo to even suggest, like, do you think there's something else going on here? Like, nobody was asking those questions. But I was glad I found Judy Wood, because that was like one of my biggest things, is it looked like dustification. And that is kind of her premise, is that there are technologies that we are kept from that have all kinds of implications. Obviously, right here in the title, free energy is one of the big ones. They don't want to unleash free energy. There's plenty of indications that there are people who have discovered it, and that the patent system is actually a way to quarantine that. You know, a guy comes up with one of these free energy devices, goes to patent it. All of a sudden, the men in black are at his door, and you don't hear from him again, or he's taken to the black projects. But he sure as hell isn't releasing some technology that he discovered. And that technology, it can be used for destruction as well. That's kind of the premise here. And it's really complex to get into, but I guess you should think about, maybe the best way I could describe it in layman's terms is they set up a bit of an energetic grid and then send waves into that grid. And when these things converge, it just basically destroys everything at a molecular level. So the Twin Towers basically dustified. They fell apart. It wasn't a controlled demolition, because, as she says, the top didn't fall to the bottom. It was just all gone at once. And one of the best pieces of evidence to suggest that I thought was most convincing is the seismic data from that day. And if you look at the seismic data on the day of 9/11, you would expect to be able to compare it to other major demolitions, let's say casinos and hotels in Vegas. They demolish them all the time. And there's an impact when all that stuff comes and hits the ground. Even though it's broken apart, it's obviously still weighs tons and tons and tons. On 9/11, there was no seismic impact. Or if it was very minor. It was not anything near what you'd expect from two of the biggest buildings falling down. So that's very weird. Why wouldn't there be data for these massive ton buildings to hit the ground? Well, she thinks they were destroyed at a molecular level using this exotic technology. Another piece of evidence she talks about is the jumpers. Everybody knows it's a very emotional and dark topic to talk about the people we saw jumping out of the buildings on 9/11. But that always was weird to me too. I didn't understand why, if planes hit a building, 10 floors up from me, I mean, of course there's destruction. We know it's not a pleasant environment, but do you really think that things would get so bad from this plane impact that you would need to jump to your death? I mean, I would just try to hang on as long as I could. But in this paradigm that she's presenting, the people are experiencing like radiation burn, like an invisible radiation burn, like a microwave burn, I guess. And so they are cooking, essentially. So in that paranoid, freaked out, awfully painful state, it now makes a little more sense why people would just be like hurling themselves to their death. I know it's not the most uplifting and enlightening thing to talk about, but I think that the official story, I don't know, that never sat well with me. So those two bits of evidence, the seismic data, which is obviously a lot more scientific, and the people jumping, which is a bit anecdotal, But in a nutshell, those would be two of the things that she presents that I think, should make anybody think, oh, maybe I should look into this. Maybe I will dig a little bit deeper. But she has made one hell of a book. It's like a college textbook, this thing. It's full of incredible diagrams and a bunch of charts with all the data you would want. Parts of it are definitely over my head, and it was a real challenge to make sure I had my my notes straight for this one. But I just think if there wasn't anything to it, this book would be 10 pages. It's so massive, and it goes through so many different things. Definitely something I would advise people to look at if they wanted to get into deeper elements of what could have happened on 9/11.
Well, 9/11 was really a catalyst for an amplification of this global awakening that's happening. There's people who have just gone, hang on, that is like such a huge circumstance, event, and nothing really does add up. And so once you sort of entertain that idea, then you start going, following the money and looking at, the central banking cartel and how it controls the money supply and has bought out the media, and the whole political spectrum. The two-party tyranny is an absolute puppet show. And the general mechanisms of control of the money in the media are so obvious, so clear once you start looking at this information, that you really start to ask, well, who are these people? Energetic influences aside, let's just let's put that at the side for the time being. We are on an earth with people, and who are these people? They're just people. Why are they choosing to do what they're doing? And there's many different claims in terms of who they are, in terms of the families, and what the dominant ideology is, I guess. Many believe it's the Zionists. Some people believe they're more of a scapegoat, and it's the Jesuits behind it. People throw out Illuminati, Satanists. There's the Khazarian Mafia, all those families, as you mentioned, Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Carnegies. Then it goes back to ancient bloodlines as well. It really is a difficult topic to study and find the truth in. So what guests do you believe have a really good handle on who these people are at the tippity-tip top of this power pyramid we call the matrix of control?
And that is the million-dollar question, man. And I did want to step back a minute because I like what you said about the show, and that I'm not trying to tell people what to think. I'm not Alex Jones screaming with the megaphone that this is the truth and I got the documents and, this is all there is. My approach is to go and find researchers that I think have some credibility and go very, very deep and have a really fleshed out perspective. And I try to learn their perspective as best I can, bring them on the air, and then interview them, but help also guide the audience into understanding this, usually complex research and this person's perspective. And a lot of times the perspectives contradict each other. In my kind of attitude, I appreciate that a lot of people think I do good introductions and good outros, but generally I feel like all I really say is, this is going to be interesting. And then afterwards, wow, that was really fascinating. Because again, I'm not trying to shove any perspective down anyone's throat. I just want to provide a platform where these kind of things can be entertained to their fullest degree without judgment. And sometimes that means playing devil's advocates for guests. Sometimes that means, well, this aspect of your research I'm not really sure about, because what about this? And, so sometimes you have to challenge them a little bit, but it's all in the name of getting a better grasp on their position or solidifying the research they've done. And where this gets into the power pyramid is, yes, the power pyramid is super difficult to nail down, and there's all kinds of possibilities. And I really, it's a flavor of the week kind of thing for me, because one week I'm convinced it's the Jesuits, because you look at all that influence. Primarily, American universities are largely Jesuit, and when you get into the conspiracy of education, the stuff of John Taylor Gatto, that's just a fascinating thread, that it's all based on the Prussian system that was used for supreme control, and that the wealthy industrialists started the American education system with the purpose of making sure they wouldn't have competition, making sure that everybody was only going to rise to a certain level. That kind of stuff is fascinating. And then with the Jesuit universities, of course, that's going to control a lot of the education system, but that gets into the medical conspiracies. if things like, everybody in the medical system in the mainstream is convinced vaccines are 100% harmless, and you're an idiot if you think any differently. Well, I mean, let's be real. These are private companies that are capable of making mistakes at a minimum. I mean, they've made mistakes. The polio vaccine, if you do your research, millions of them were tainted with a simian monkey virus, like a rhesus monkey virus, because they were growing the polio cells on monkey kidneys. Well, that actually mutates into cancer in a good chunk of the population. And look what we have now is a cancer epidemic. So I don't know, but to get back to the power pyramid, I mean, yeah, you look at all the influence universities have, medical conspiracies, nutrition, which is a big problem, GMOs, all these industries, they come out of these universities. So you have to assume that that's a huge chunk of influence. But then, of course, you have the bankers, which are predominantly Jewish. And what can you get done without banks? I mean, if you control that and everybody, all these countries owe all this debt, all these people owe all this debt, they owe the debt to these bankers. So it's hard to think that there is a power greater than that, because who doesn't operate within the money system to some degree? So that's a huge bit of power. They have to be on the near top tier, as well as the networks who have created and structured the universities, who create the quote unquote experts that tell us everything about, this, that, and the other. So those are two serious aspects of power. Of course, there's some guests who talk about the triple crown control. They say there are 3 places on the planet that are essentially without jurisdiction. Obviously Washington, D.C. is a big one that Americans will recognize because it's not in any state. It's just a little thing cut out. Well, there's a area, the city of London, which is inside London, is another area. And let's see, there's DC, London, and the Vatican. Yeah, that would be the third one. So the fact that those 3 tentacles on the squid are pretty powerful, I mean, you got to say there's a good case made for that. But I think those groups, in a nutshell, get pretty close to the capstone, but it is difficult to know.
I think it is important. I mean, there's many sort of alternative sort of researchers and social commentators that say it doesn't really matter who it is, let's just get on with taking back control of the system. And that is a fair enough point. It really is. At the end of the day, if we just organise to take back our money supply, take back our banking, take back our media, take back our education, take back our medicines, then we'd just do it. And we wouldn't have to worry about this, and we can just localise our lives and create what we need to live in harmony and in balance. But it is an interesting question, and it certainly, again, I don't have any hardcore belief around who is and who isn't, but it's certainly something that has captured the imagination of so many truth seekers. Now, let's move on to what's happening in 2016. Like this whole alternative media is, a lot of it is focused on the coming implosion of the fiat system and our economic demise. We've got all this talk of martial law with all the gun confiscation. We've got all this terrorism and false flags and a whole ton of fear-based information that is washing over the consciousness of humanity. And then on the side of that, there's this slight little bit of hope, which says that Russia and Putin and China, and they're going to save us through the BRICS and through the AIB, and there's this whole new economic platform that is going to undermine the power matrix of this Western, or I wouldn't even say Western, but more the globalists. But then there's the accusation that these guys are actually controlled opposition and everyone's just working on the same team. We're going to bring in the new world order. So it's all that's a mess as well, and people are really worried about this economic situation. So have you had any guests that sort of elucidate that confusion?
Well, a lot. I mean, everybody's trying to figure out a lot, and it's a big thing to make predictions in the conspiracy world. A lot of people want to be able to tell everybody what's going to happen next or what's going forward with the elite's playbook. And I just think it's too hard to know. Obviously, we are in troubled times. I mean, just today, there's a coup going on in Turkey. We just had the Bastille Day disaster. yesterday or the day before, a Dallas shooting before that. Things are getting kind of crazy. I mean, it's hard to deny that that these kind of events are ramping up. And if you think that there's orchestration and manipulation going on behind them, I mean, that's got to give you pause as to, what the hell is going on. But I try to be pretty measured and take myself out of things and say, people in the conspiracy realm have been saying that this is the end, this is Armageddon. They've been saying that for a very long time. I mean, 2012 is a great example. How many guests I had before then who thought it was going to be such a radical time of change. And, looking back, it wasn't so obvious, but I definitely think there's an argument that that was a pivot point towards something different. But it definitely would be fairly minor, because you can also make the argument that it was just another year, and it's just a matter of perspective. But it's always hard to tell what's going on. I mean, the Shemitah cycle is something that a recent guest, Jeff Berwick, brought up that I thought was really interesting, that he has found this certain cycle that is based in the Jewish faith, that every 7 years they're supposed to forgive debts. And this has been perversed into something called the Shemitah cycle, where you'll see major drops in the stock market every 7 years. And every seventh of the 7 years, the year after, is called a Jubilee year. And that would happen to be this year. So he is predicting some real serious turmoil at the end of this year. He said October 2nd was definitely the day to watch. And I have had other guests that talk about that too. They say the financial situation is so dire, it has snowballed to such a degree that there is no way to get out of it without some type of collapse, without some type of radical change. But you just got to be kind of careful with those kind of ideas, because people have been living for a long time, and the chances that the real end is going to happen in your lifetime are pretty low. But people seem to be frothing at the mouth to get a front row seat for Armageddon, and I'm just not really like that. I try to be a little more practical about how we might be navigating in the future and transitioning, yes, but I don't think that this is going to be, Mad Max world. One thing I think is interesting and a practical approach that I like is, again, my buddy Gordon White, he talks about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which most people know what that is, but it's a big trade deal that puts a lot of power in the hands of corporations. Corporations are actually allowed to sue countries for infringing on their profits, which is just insane. So, for example, Phillip Morris can sue Australia because Australia puts through some legislation to put a bunch of major warnings and take the branding off of cigarettes. Well, you're infringing on my profits, so I'm going to sue you.
If you don't kill your citizens with our cigarettes, we're going to sue you.
Yeah, I mean, it's nuts, and it is bad. Clearly, it's bad. But what you should do is kind of be neutral and look at what the elite are trying to do, and think about how they're pivoting. Because one thing that could be hopeful about this transition is that for such a long time we've been working with just half of physics, and we've left off. We're getting back into the free energy stuff. There are technologies that have been left off the table and quarantined, and they're not in the school books. This gets back into Tesla stuff. There have been scientists who've discovered things that would be very empowering for the community, but they infringe on corporate profits, so they shut it all down. Well, Gordon kind of looks at the possibility that the Trans-Pacific Partnership could be a way for the elite to roll out some of this exotic technology and still stay ahead of the game, still profit from it. Another example would be that the Rockefeller Foundation took a lot of their investments in oil in the past year. They sold off a lot of their investments in oil. Well, that's weird, because they've always been the oil tycoons. So what does that signify? What does that signal? Well, it signals that they could be pivoting to a new technology for the masses, not because they want to, but because the information is just getting out there more and more, and they want to stay in control. They don't want riots. They really want us to be right up to that point where we'll still go to work every day. We can be dissatisfied with life, but they really don't want to lose control of the full-out game. Think of a game of Monopoly where you're just crushing with hotels on every major property. You want to keep playing that game because you're winning. You don't want people to just say, well, screw this, there's no way I'm going to get ahead, and just throw up throw up their monopoly money and walk away. You want to keep the game going when you're winning. So I think the elite have the same attitude. And when they took their money out of oil, they started investing heavily in this company called Tri-Alpha. Now, just think of the name right there, Tri-Alpha. That's a very cryptic, esoteric name that harkens on the kind of things that the elite are always kind of putting out there. So the name is a little bit suspicious, and they're a free energy company. They're a cold fusion company working on things. So why are the Rockefellers investing in a cold fusion company unless they might be thinking about rolling out cold fusion? And that's a possible scenario, but that's kind of the way, a more practical way to look at what the elite might be doing, because they're going to stay ahead of the game. And yes, I would love to completely topple the power pyramid and just have freedom and happiness and ponies everywhere. But I just don't know that we'll see that. But what you can do is actually try to get a better grip on where we may be going and navigate your own life a little better, because you only live once, 100 years if you're lucky. And, you know, you can stand at the bottom shaking your fist at the global elite and, you know, live your life that way. Or you can just try to be as happy as you can, navigate this crooked, backward system. But, I mean...
Well, you can do both. You can shake your fist at the elite, but also have a good fucking time at the same time.
You can, and I try to. But I think that... that perspective of what are the elite doing with their money, how are they pivoting, because they are kind of a few steps ahead of the culture, whether you like it or not. That's kind of the reality. So watching what they do is interesting, and we are at a point where they're making some big changes, and you know, I like to watch them. I like to be a little hopeful that something as nasty as the TPP could be, you know, could have a silver lining in that, in the rollout of these bigger technologies where they're letting corporations get more power, but they're also going to be doing things like Tesla's going to have self-driving cars. I mean, what happens when someone dies in a self-driving car? I mean, who's the insurance company? Well, right. I mean, Elon Musk just came out and said that the autopilot wasn't enacted. And of course he's going to say that. Who knows if it was, but I'm all for self-driving cars. If I hit a kid today, by the time they're 16, they probably won't even have to have a driver's license. The seats will all probably face towards the middle so they can all play Pokemon Go on the way.
Welcome to the zombie apocalypse. Apocalypse. Yeah, look, it's nice to think that they do have, you know, some good interests, best interests invested in humanity and the environment. But when we reflect on their behaviour, the toxicity in food and water, the fluoride, and you've got the whatever is going on in the air, and then just in general the medicinal brainwashing and dumbing down, the media dumbing down, the whole education system, everything is designed to keep people sedated and good little minions of the system, robotic in response to the world and not asking questions. And you know, there's no forgiving that. At the end of the day,
oh right,
you've made.
I don't want anyone to think I'm an elite sympathizer, not at all. But I think that if this stuff were to come out, it's because the pressure is so great, you know, that they were forcing their hand. And that's why I brought up the analogy of the game. You want to keep playing the game. So, you know, if you can tell your buddy that you're playing Monopoly with, hey, don't quit. Just, I'll give you a couple times around the board where you don't have to pay when you land on my properties. Like, you'll do anything you can to keep the game going because you're so in the lead. And that's how I think the elite are thinking. So if there's a lot of pressure on them, if a lot of information is out there and they're going to these Bilderberg meetings and saying, look, you know, we're looking at the hits on Google. There's way too many people who are learning about this free energy stuff. What do you say we throw them the bone just so they don't riot? I think that when we put that pressure on them, they will give us a little bit so that they don't lose it all. And that's kind of what I'm saying is there might be a point where they're pivoting because they've exhausted this realm of only giving us half of science. Like, people are getting too wise to that to some degree. That's the silver lining I'm talking about. I wouldn't want to say, oh, let's just, you know, please, sir, can I have some free energy? Like for Oliver Twist and some screwed up orphanage. Like, I'm not begging them for something. I'm not looking at them as like some type of savior. But I think that the pressure is on where they're going to face worldwide riots if they don't do something to drastically change the game. And they could give us that, invest heavily in it, profit, and still be in charge. And that's what I think we might be looking at in the next 10 years.
Yeah, well, one of the accusations is the depopulation agenda. You got the
True.
Georgia Guidestones. I think there was, I think Jeff Berwick identified the number of the date of August 14th. I think it was this year.
Yeah. It's on that cube we saw go in not too long ago.
So that very well may be part of the agenda as well, given all the toxins in the system and the complete disrespect for the sovereignty and freedoms and just general health of humanity. It's just been an absolute bombardment. And
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I've got no idea if that's going to be a potential reality that manifests. As you said, I think you summed up really well in terms of really just enjoying it. I tend to look at this as just one big spiritual game. It's got the magic, it's got the madness. It's a bit exciting, really, because of all the, the mystery of it all. I mean, I've gone through real deep synchronization, symbolism, and interconnection, and altered sort of realities, and just the whole process of that neo-shamanistic aspect of life that I mentioned before, and that's just been unbelievably awesome. So I have no hang-ups whatsoever on the reality that we've got. I think we need to, I think part of this journey, the journey of the warrior, of the spirituals, the warrior spirit, is about identifying these issues and taking action to resolve them and to build, something greater for our next generations. But to make it your sole purpose, or to make it, to let it affect you in a negative way, that's where we need to take that sort of be a bit more self-respectful around it, and look after ourselves at the same time. All right, let's go on a little bit of a journey through the past. Hey, I noticed that you went on a bit of a journey yourself with Graham Hancock. He talks about ancient civilizations. Part of the alternative perspective is there's a great deluge back, I think, 10, 12,000 years ago. Our ancestors really go well beyond, and our civilization goes well beyond the standard mainstream view around how we evolved. For one example, the original peoples here in Australia, they were around 60, 80,000 years, something like that, maybe more, but they also had quite complex agricultural and technological systems. They were growing, fields of 100 or more different crops. So there is a whole aspect of our past that really isn't discussed in the mainstream. Mainstream archaeology really has failed in providing a true narrative about what's going on. So can you tell me a little bit about what you know in terms of our ancient past and what guests people should follow?
Man, it's pretty much impossible to know much about the ancient past, but of course Graham is great. I also love Michael Cremo, who is an interesting guy who pushes the dates back millions of years. Everybody's heard the Anunnaki story. Everybody's heard Zechariah Stitchin. I actually am not a huge fan of his. I feel like that's kind of a simplistic paradigm. I've heard a lot of people they really don't trust his translations all that much. And I think it's an interesting saga. Michael Tellinger is probably the best at laying that all out and being very convincing that might be the reality. He gets into the Anunnaki had us mining gold. Why do we like gold so much? It really isn't that great of a metal. We must have got it from somewhere. I mean, that's kind of loose evidence to say, yep, Anunnaki, that whole story must be the reality. But it is fascinating when you get into it, and he talks about it for hours and hours. I actually like John Lash is another guy. He talks about Gnosticism quite a bit, and he talks about the archons. And I know you kind of asked me about practical ancient history, but a lot of the ones I like are the guys who bring in aliens to some degree, but with some different twist than the Anunnaki, ancient aliens, Giorgio Tsoukalos kind of pop stuff that's out there. And John Lash talks about the archons being these spiritual parasites, these mental parasites that play on humanity, and they feed off of our fear. And this is a big thing in the conspiracy world, the idea that the elite are creating conditions of fear through the media because there is some type of energetic benefit for them or their masters if they are victims of archon control themselves, or if they're conjuring this stuff up.
Hence
so
the Matrix.
yeah, and I love guests who talk about that, and John Lash should be one of the better ones. Yeah, but Graham is great. I was lucky enough to go to Armenia with him last year for 2 weeks and look at all these ancient sites, because a lot of people know Armenia is right next to Turkey, and Turkey's where Göbekli Tepe is. And everybody knows Göbekli Tepe is one of the big buzz sites that's out there right now for trying to reconstruct our ancient past. So we figured, these imaginary lines weren't here years ago. Let's go nearby to Armenia and see if there's anything there. So he had this tour. I was like, yeah, I'll definitely be on that. And we looked at things like there's a giant hill that looks just like it would be a buried pyramid. The local researchers there dug deep into it, and they got to a door. They took some pictures of it. They filled it back in so no one would disturb it more. And then the government shut them down, and they're not allowed to open it again. We ran into a few of those situations where there'd been some investigation, but then the kibosh had been thoroughly stamped down on it. And so we got to see some things that were really cool. That is one of the best ones. Karahoonj would be another one. That's kind of a bit of like a Stonehenge kind of thing. And we were there on the Armenian New Year, where you could actually at midnight look through these cuts in the megalithic stones, and Orion's belt would line up perfectly. And so that was really fascinating to see. And I think there is so many things left undiscovered. I don't know if you've gotten into any researchers who look at ancient America, but I think that's fascinating. I mean, so many people in the conspiracy movement, I mean, we live here in America and we don't even look at what was here. We just think, oh, there were some Native American Indians here doing their thing, and that's all there was, for as long as we go back. But there are things like the Cahokia Mounds and the Serpent Mount. And if you look at, newspaper clippings from the early American settlers in the 1800s, you can find newspaper clippings where they're like, oh, we were, going to build this cabin, and we dug down deep and we found giant skeletons that are 14 feet tall. And we shipped them off to the Smithsonian. That story comes through over and over again. You can go to the Library of Congress. There's a newspaper archive. I forgot the exact web address, but search newspaper archive, Library of Congress. It'll come up. There's a search bar. Put in giant skeleton. Put in underground city, and just spend your day looking at all these articles from before they really had their media locked tight. You wouldn't have a story like that come out in the media now. But back then, it would just be what happened, and they swept it under the rug later. So there is a window of evidence for some really strange things that I've been pretty convinced of. And I think the Smithsonian's role has been to take in anomalous artifacts and then bury them or destroy them and keep history in a nice, tight, clean narrative that they like. I think the past is definitely way deeper, richer, longer than we've been told. And I can't say a whole lot more than that, but the good guys to look at, I think, are Graham Hancock, Michael Cremo, and probably John Lash on some of that. And as far as the stuff in America, Josh Reeves does a video series of some of that ancient stuff and the idea of giant cultures that were here. And some Native American cultures actually have stories of them fighting giants. They said that there were civilizations of giants that were cannibals that had red hair. So eventually they launched, it's part of their lore or their oral tradition, that they launched a big campaign, got some tribes together, chased all of them down into a cave and got rid of them, wiped out every last one of them. So very weird stuff. Giant skeletons, 13, 14 feet tall. This is very weird. I didn't learn about that in school. Is it all fake? Are every one of those newspapers from the 1800s wrong? Did they not have a proper measurement system? I mean, I think there's something there. I think the past is very weird, very rich, whether it's aliens, giants, pygmies, I don't know, maybe inner earth beings, but I love hearing from those types of guests. And like I said, some of them contradict each other, but they all tell fascinating stories, and I don't think they're all wrong.
The other person you mentioned was Tellinger, and I've interviewed him on my channel, know him quite well, and he talks. That's something I want to get into it in a little bit around, what are the solutions. He looks at Ubuntu and contributionism as a way of removing the need for money, the enslavement of money, and going back to some of the basics. But there's absolutely a huge potential for our DNA to be spliced with some other form of being, whether or not it be multidimensional or something else. We've got the missing link. Evolution has just got so many holes. The theory of evolution, so many holes throughout it, and I think we should be up to tabling these things for public discussion and really looking at what is the sort of source of humanity, and how does epigenetics fit in? How's the creation of reality itself through sacred geometry and all those sorts of things? They're amazing questions, and we should no doubt be asking them. All right, so just to move on, I also wanted to look at, while you mentioned the alien agenda, we've got all this, and you've talked about some of the technology we don't know about. We know there's UFOs flying around the sky, whether or not they're human-made, alien-made, or a combination of both. We've got crop circles and the lies around the moon landing, and then there's the potential that we're already going to Mars, and then there's all these underground bases and super soldiers and the lies of NASA, and there's just a big area of discussion and exploration there. Who do you recommend to visit that rabbit hole?
Which one in particular? Can you nail it down a little more?
Well, let's look at the underground bases, super soldiers, and what's going on with the other space travel.
Well, underground bases, there. Who is the guy? Richard. There's a guy, Richard Sauter, I believe, is the guy who writes about the deep underground bases. And he's pretty good. I mean, he definitely does his research. He's pretty measured. He doesn't get into things like the battle at Dulce, which is what people talk about quite a bit, which is an underground battle with aliens that happened at the Dulce base. I think that stuff's fascinating. It's hard to know. And then, if we're talking about space, my main man Crow, I'm sure anyone who's familiar with the HigherSide chats has heard an episode I've done with him, but he is a guy who's had his cameras on the sky for quite a long time. He's seen many UFOs, many different odd types of UFOs, things that seem to be chasing chemtrail planes, all kinds of stuff. And his real bread and butter is the lunar wave, where he was filming the moon and he noticed this weird wave that came, he was way up detailed on the moon, like big full moon picture, and you can see all the craters really zoomed in, and then this wave crosses across the moon, kind of like a tracking bar in an old VHS tape. And he's like, how could that be? This isn't analog tape. I'm doing this digitally. This is a digital recording. And he came to feel that was evidence that the moon is some type of projection, and that what he had witnessed was a glitch or a resetting of that projection. Now, this is pretty far out stuff, but he is not the only one at this point who's captured the lunar wave. There's been multiple people, and now they're actually getting a pattern to it. It revolves around the equinoxes and the solstices. They're noticing these things, that these are time periods of a clear window where you can capture the wave if you're looking for it. And that is far out. Of course, another big thing that I am not a proponent of, but it's shown up on my show plenty, and it's definitely taken over the alternative movement, is the flat earth theory. It's hard to deny.
That was exactly where I was going to go to.
I figured. I was trying to avoid it, but I'm like, screw it. I'll say it. I will say it. That's the thing. Like, I've had guests who talk about us having bases on the moon and Mars, and then I've had guests who talk about the Earth being flat and we're in some dome and you can't get out to space. There is no space out there. The moon is a projection. You can't land on it. It's not some rock out there. So I've had guests on both sides of the fence. I definitely think the moon landing was hoaxed, because you can look at the evidence of the things they've presented to us and see clearly that it's not real. I mean, there are backgrounds that are duplicated, which would only happen on a stage. There's areas of different light sources. I mean, I can shred that stuff. It's not hard. But that doesn't mean we never went to the moon. It just means the footage that they've shown us of the moon and Apollo missions is a fraud. So that doesn't tell us a whole lot. So I leave the door open for the fact that we might be going to the moon in secret. We might have bases there. We might have bases on the moon or on Mars as well. But I'm also open to the idea that the Van Allen radiation belt does not allow for humans to travel through it. That's been a big thing. That's been something that people who talk about the faked moon landing cite all the time, that no human can get through this belt. So I kind of like that angle too. And when you bring aliens into that and say, well, the Earth is flat, or the Van Allen radiation belt kind of prevents life from traveling through it, you get into a weird space where the aliens, the UFOs we see, might be Earth-based. And you're like, how could that be? Well, reptilians are talked about quite a bit. And isn't it funny that we have these waves, even in the official story, we have these waves of evolution, these waves of extinction that happened, and the one right before us was supposed to be giant reptiles. Now we're in an age of mammals, and we're this human, intelligent apex mammal. But what if there was a humanoid version that was an apex reptile, and that somehow in a small pocket survived the extinction? Just like if there was a mass extinction today, some of us would probably survive. Now, the ones who did survive would have a whole lot of knowledge about the past that other people wouldn't. Like, let's say there are little pockets of chaos that survive, but there's something more measured. Like if our elite were to go to one of these deep underground bases and then everything were to go to shit, and then they'd come out years later and try to go around the planet and pick up these little pockets of stragglers and try to reteach them things, you could kind of get a sense of how our ancient knowledge is. A lot of the cultures we have, Hopi Indians, Sumerians, they talk about seeders, seeders of knowledge, people who came and told them things. And a lot of them talk about them coming from underwater or under the ocean, or underground. The Hopi talk about the ant people who led them down underground when there was a disaster and then brought them back out to the surface. So that's where the alien thing gets really interesting to me, the idea that it's all underground and that UFOs come from the inner Earth. And I know that's weird, and it's kind of a lot to go into, but I've had guests who talk about that. William Michael Mott, one of my favorites, who talks about the fact that UFOs could be Earth-based. Mac Tonnies, he's actually deceased, but he was a guy who wrote a great book about crypto-terrestrials too. And I don't know. It's an interesting can of worms for sure. There's multiple opinions on it, but that is one area I'm fascinated with. Ancient cultures, the real history we have there, how it involves possibly other entities. Can we get out into space? How much has been explored in that realm? All fascinating questions that we'll probably be asking for years. And I'm always down to hear the latest research from the most cutting edge researchers. And again, at the end of the day, all I can say is, wow, that's interesting.
When we look at that model itself, just in terms of the Earth discussion, there's the electric universe, there's the flat Earth, the hollow Earth, torsion Earth. I mean, there are anomalies with the
growing Earth, and
the larger Earth. The Earth is just bigger than what it is. We could discuss this all day.
Yeah, I love those. I love those models. I love having a guest on who will break down their model in full, and they'll be really convincing. And then the next week I'll have someone who breaks down a completely different model in an equally convincing way. And you just eventually you gotta put your chips on something and be like, this is what I'm going with. But I think the electric universe and the hollow Earth and the torsion Earth, I think those are all they work together really well. There's a synergy between them that I appreciate. And I think that if I had to put my money on something, it would be that the Earth is hollow, and that all planets are, and that the electric universe model is the real deal. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm into ether theory and all that stuff. I think that's what alchemy used to be about. That would be where I'd put my money. I cannot go to the flat Earth. I know it's controversial, but I think space exists. I'm a space theorist. I think it's out there.
Yeah, I do too, but I can't pinpoint what the truth is. I think there's not enough evidence to really do that in any of
Well,
the models. So,
right. It's really compelling that you can't, and I'm pretty convinced. I mean, depends on who you talk to. A lot of people think I'm an idiot for saying you can't disprove the flat earth, but it's actually way more difficult than you might imagine. And anyone who's actually watched one of the really well done flat earth documentaries or watched a couple of them, you will have questions at the end where you're like, wow, I did not expect that to mess with me so much, but it does. One of the big things is, where's all the pictures of Earth? We have one that was from the 70s, and there are some partial pictures, but when it comes to real pictures of the Earth, there's maybe one or two, and they've been using the same one for a long time. And the one that we're most familiar with, the Earth looks like a perfect marble ball. They call it the blue marble picture, I believe. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you ask him in an interview what the Earth looks like from space, he says, oh, well, the Earth is pear-shaped. It's not a perfect marble. It's actually like a very deflated balloon. It's very oval-like. It's like an egg. It's a pear shape. Well, why don't the pictures reflect a pear shape? The pictures I've seen look nothing like that. So either the pictures are fake, or one of our leading celebrity scientists doesn't know what the shit he's talking about. So it's one or the other. And I'm inclined to think that we've been lied to. And if NASA faked the moon landings, then they've obviously faked that picture of the Earth that they say was from the moon, or from those missions, which I think is the photo we have. But I wouldn't put it past them to lie a whole bunch of times. I think that the moon landing rabbit hole goes far deeper than just, oh, we faked the Apollo missions and we've told you the truth every other time. But I don't know if it goes all the way to flat Earth.
now there's a ton of other topics we could discuss. I think we're going to have to do this again at some point. I mean, one of the big things for me that sort of struck me was the Titanic conspiracy, and also the extent of the Holocaust. It's not as we've been led to believe. Also the stuff around the corporatocracy and the government. Corporations masquerading as governments, all this sovereignty, the birth certificate contract. We could go on to, all these sugar addictions and cures, and there's a ton of stuff we could discuss. But why I feel like we're sort of kindred spirits in a way, Greg, is because you have a view on the paradigm, the economic paradigm, where you're not sure if you're free market capitalists, and you reflected that you think that government might be necessary, whereas a lot of libertarians and anarchists say that it shouldn't be. I'm really unsure of that as well, and I think we need to be quite inventive and creative with how we deal with how we move forward from here, because it is a dangerous world at the moment, and we do need some sort of mechanisms in place for protection, safety, and ongoing management, and all the rest of it. So that sort of leads into, I guess, the final part of this podcast, and that is, where do we go from here? What are we going to do? Is there any interesting things in terms of the system that I mentioned Michael Challenger before. He's got his Ubuntu movement. There's people like Jacques Fresco with the Venice Project. Peter Joseph, I really like as well. Very smart guy. With the Zeitgeist stuff. They're all talking about a moneyless world, one where we put aside that control mechanism and start putting in the incentive for people to explore their creativity and passion and their community, I guess. So is that something that speaks to you?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And you brought up kind of a good point. I've gotten in trouble lately because I had a few anarcho-capitalists on, and then kind of in my wrap-up, I said, I don't identify with that, and I'm not sure that it's the answer. And the clause came out on that, because people get very attached to their particular paradigms, and they want them to be the answer for everything. And that drives me nuts, because I don't subscribe to any particular ism or ist. And after this interview, people wrote me saying, oh, Greg Carlwood's a statist. He thinks that you need to have a government. I didn't say I'm a statist. I didn't say you need anything. I just said I'm skeptical of there being zero government and it working out all that well, because I was deeply involved in Occupy, and I saw what no leadership does. I saw what, it becomes a 2-hour conversation because there are some people who want to go to sleep because they need to work in the morning, and there's a drum circle over here on the right. And the drum circle doesn't want their rights to be infringed on because they want to play drums all night, but these people need to get to bed. And then it becomes this mind-numbing, hour-long conversation about whose rights, and it's like, dude, I don't want to live my life dealing with every little problem like this. Like, I'm just not so sure what system is best. And it's all hypothetical anyway. It's all just philosophical arguments because there are so many people on the planet, so many intricacies to society, that to have blind faith in an untested system, which is what anarcho-capitalism is, it's an idea, and it hasn't, you can't really point to a society that ran that way and ran successfully. So if you don't have a case study, a model, a real world example, then it's just an idea. So how can you have such blind faith that that is the end all be all answer? I would love to get away from money. I think capitalism, and I mean, one of my t-shirt designs at Conspiracies is "What's After Capitalism?" because I wanted to have that conversation, but I didn't want to say something as bold as, something so anti-capitalistic, because that just gets people all, it gets them steaming. They want to have that fight. So I asked, what's after capitalism, to say, I'm not saying capitalism's good or bad. I'm just saying, we're going to be here on the planet for a while. Hopefully, maybe we could start looking at a better system. Maybe we could start looking at the incentives of capitalism and how it brings out the worst in people. And we could maybe change that and create better incentives. I love the Venus Project. Jacques Fresco, I'm so lucky to have gotten to interview him a couple of times. He's now, I think, over 100 years old, but I interviewed him when he was 97 and again at 99, I believe. But, I mean, he's done amazing work. I used to really love the Venus Project. I've kind of backed away from it because I just think every system, it's so hard. Like, if you were to try to actually implement any of these philosophical ideas into society, you'd run into a million problems you never considered, when you were running around touting this philosophy or that one. And I think the dirty secret about contributionism, the dirty truth about the anarcho-capitalist mindset and libertarianism and volunteerism is that no one actually contributes. No one actually volunteers without there being some motivation or incentive. A good example that's real to me is my podcast. I ran the HigherSide chats as long as I could on donations only. I was convinced that's the way I wanted to do it. We're never going to take advertising dollars because no corporate sponsor is going to put up with the kind of shit I'm going to talk about. I can't rely on that income. So that's not going to work. So I was all about donations. And I, for a long time, was like, if you guys would just contribute a couple of bucks, with the numbers we have, it would work. And no one does it. They'll write letters and say how much they love the show and it's so unique and they just can't get this information anywhere else, but they don't contribute financially. And that's fine, whatever. But the reality is I had to go with a different model. So now I have the first hour's free and the second hour is for a $5 subscription. And it's not the model I wanted, but it just has been my experience that if you don't force their hand in some way. Like, I don't consider it a forcing because obviously signing up for the show is voluntary. But if there's no incentive there, everybody's just going to sit there, take what they can get for free and say, oh, somebody else will probably contribute enough that it won't be a problem. And that is something I've experienced in my life. And I'm afraid that if we rolled out something like volunteerism or no government and everybody just contributes the amount of money to the system that they want, and it's not a tax, it's not forced, I just think there'd be nothing. Nobody would actually do that. Everybody is very prepared to do the minimum. And maybe not everybody, but a great majority of people are prepared to do the minimum only. And that's a sad reality. But if we're talking about human nature and how societies are going to work, I just don't think that's the way to do it. One idea I do like to talk about something positive instead, something that I think is a real world possibility that doesn't require a complete collapse and overhaul of the entire system is public banking as opposed to private and a public income. Now, I'd like to get away from money, but I don't know that we're ever going to really do that. But we could look at the idea of a basic income, and that would be from Ellen Brown, she's so great. She's the guest who really put this in my head, because I used to think of it as welfare for all. I'm like, how would that work? How does the money work when everybody's just getting free money from the government? But it's not like that. Consider it like everybody gets a debit card in the country, and it's got $1,000 on it, and it expires at the end of the month, and another 1,000 gets put on the first. So you got to use it. It's use it or lose it. And let's say this society had a flat sales tax of 15 or 20%. That's kind of high, but that would be the only tax. And the premise of this is that when money gets spent and it gets taxed, the government's taking a little piece of it back every time until it eventually gets all of that $1,000 from it being circulated and, you know, fractioned off more and more and more till that 15% is the 100%. I like that idea because it's the exact opposite of trickle down economics. It's trickle up. Let's start the money at the bottom. Let's give it to the people, let them circulate it, and eventually all these corporations will get it. Because you know people are going to buy Coke and Pepsi. You know, they're going to stay billion dollar corporations, really. But people will give them the money, but start it at the bottom, and then it'll filter its way to the top, and then it can get redistributed to the government. I think that is an interesting paradigm that I really like. And it may not be perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not, you know, running around advocating it necessarily. I just think it's an interesting idea that would be a great improvement over the system we have now, which is a complete stranglehold by the 1%, by the big banks, by the multinational corporations. And they're just taking more and more. And our government is cutting taxes for these corporations, cutting taxes for the rich. And you know, the people are getting spread thinner and thinner. So I think it's a possible idea that could work, and it's something we could see in our lifetime, as opposed to just hoping for the Venus Project and then turning 90 ourselves and seeing that it never happened and we never got anywhere. I'd rather make life better as fast as we can. And I think some of these smaller steps might be the ones that show people how screwed up our system is now, how much better it could be. And then from that stage, we might be able to do something way more vast. But I don't know. I'm just a simple stoner.
Nah, amen, brother. I think you're really spot on there. I've written a couple articles where I've looked at the short-term and the long-term solutions in the same breath. The long-term solutions maybe potentially being a moneyless society, but the short-term being obviously public banking. I mean, we need to have all those insane profits from this model reinvested in the community. Like it should be publicly owned, public utility. That is just a no-brainer. Anybody who believes otherwise, it's just you really need to look deeper into it. As well as, you know, I like the debit transaction tax. So just make a tax on each transaction that you make. But the one that you mentioned, the sales tax, that could work too. There is various options that we need to start discussing. But just to take a step back, you mentioned the human nature of being selfish and being lazy. No, you could argue that it is. You could also argue that it's engineered. You could argue that it's in our DNA for so many years, that to be greedy, to be highly competitive with each other, and that it's part of our education system and been wired from birth to act like that. And maybe an education process could help free ourselves from those chains of needing to compete instead of cooperate. So there's a whole gamut of discussion we could have around that. But I certainly do agree that education and not indoctrination, I mean actual education, helping people to think for themselves and look at all the different options and possibilities that we do have is the way to go. And especially in the alternative media, you mentioned the sort of put downs that you got because you weren't exactly an anarcho-capitalist yourself. And I just find that fragmentation, that division is unneeded. We can all have our big or our small or even big differences around our philosophies and beliefs in life. But I really think that we need to put all those differences to the side, accept that we're going to have a different view on how we move forward, both in the short and the long term, and really unite. The unification process is the next step. It's clear that we've got all these people waking up, but the people are waking up in different ways. I don't believe you ever become awake so to speak. I think it's a process, it's a journey of
Yeah.
life, and it's a journey of becoming more conscious around particular areas. Some people are awake around the system, some people are awake around the deep consciousness and energetic construct that we co-create ourselves in, and the magic and part of that. Some people are aware of both and are exploring both of those sorts of experiences or paradigms. But
Yeah.
regardless of how awake we personally are in whatever particular subject, no one's better than each other. No one's, we're all on the same bloody team. We don't need to be competing around. We've got the sole answer to reality and that's it, and everyone should follow myself. We all need to put all that bullshit aside and actually unify to deal with the education process that needs to occur and start implementing the changes that we do need. So,
Well said. Well said.
yeah, look, it's just that's where we're at. That energetically, that's where we're at, and that's clearly, there has been a change since 2012 or in the last 15 years. Huge amounts of consciousness expansion that's going on, and what can we do about it? A lot of people get frustrated with it. A lot of people are stuck in the fear and the anger. But all I say to them is, go and do something local. Get yourself active in the local community. Grow your own food. Join some support groups. Do whatever the self work that you need to do. Find a bit of peace and love and honor and wonder in this life, because it's all there for you. Excuse me. And then also start discussing this we've got a beautiful global platform. We have the emergence of a global culture with all these various differences, but we are connecting through the internet. It's an amazing tool and we should capitalize on it. So I don't know what the response is. I know that it's alleged that Anonymous is organising some protests right now around America. Have you heard of that?
Well, yeah, but I don't trust Anonymous. I mean, Anonymous could be anybody who wants to take on that title. So at this point, I don't know who that is. But I mean, you did bring up some good points about human nature, and Jacques Fresco is great in that. Human nature, it's hard to say that there is one human nature when there's 7 billion people, and that's just who are alive today. But this is just something on my mind. I hate to end on such a kind of a negative thing, but this is some raw truth. And you're right that the system needs to change. It's good that we need to be positive, and it really does need to change. And I hope that there is an awakening. But this is something I've been thinking about lately. If you've noticed, we've seen some indications, you get these things online where people in sweatshops over in China and India, they're slipping notes into some of the products that they've been working on. Like, a person who's making Tupperware slips in a note that says, "Help. They've got us in slave labor camps over here. These are horrible conditions. I'm forced to make this stuff for 10 cents a day." And they risk their job, they risk their life to put these notes in these products that they're manufacturing. And then, Americans will stroll through a Target and they'll pop open some jewelry box. It's, some shitty little $10 thing. And they'll find one of these notes. And it's like, oh my God, that's so sad. But the saddest part about this is that they think that we don't know. They think that if they get that note into that item and it gets out into the world, that we're going to realize what's happening, and we're going to go right in there and we're going to free them. We're going to take those shackles right off. But that's not true. And that's what's so sad, is they think that the reason they're in such a shitty situation is because we don't know. But we know. We've known for a long time. And I don't know that we're doing much about it. So I hope there is an awakening. And I hope that it speeds up. And I hope that humanity does start to look out for each other and itself against the globalists. But a lot of people seem very complacent to take the benefits of this fucked up system. And they're not paying many costs. And even though they're in debt and they want things better for themselves, there are things worse for a lot of people on this planet. And no one seems to be doing all that much to make life better for them. And I think that's kind of sad. And I think it's a bit of an indicator for where an awakening really might be.
Absolutely. Self-responsibility, activism. I know it's a massive psy-op within the New Age community just to say, oh, it's all right. Should be right, mate. Everything's meant to be. And I don't need to do anything. Like, people need to sort of wake themselves and shake themselves and understand that, no, you are called to action. Your spiritual warrior needs to be engaged. You need to do something, no matter how small, regardless of what context you're in. We can all make our small contributions to making this world a better place, especially in how we spend our money. That is, the corporations will respond to a change in the way that we spend our money. But there are people waking up on the various levels I mentioned before. People are slipping down as well, slipping back at this indoctrination, this robotic perspective. The minions of the system, they actually fight to support their own enslavement, and that's just this weird paradox. The juxtaposition, as you said before, the duality of our world, where we have the darkness and we have the lightness. And I guess it's up to each individual to choose which path they're going to take, because it's a daunting road. It's a scary road, especially for the young awoken. But it's a fulfilling, rewarding, and even a magical one as well if you do it right. So. All right, Greg, what an amazing chat, mate. As I said, we could probably talk for hours. I need to let you go. But before we go, just a couple more questions. First, is there a subject or a guest or something that you really think that the audience needs to consider in the context of this discussion?
I think one of the least talked about topics that we've had shows on is the new chronology movement. It's a thing that's not even talked about in English very much, because Anatoly Fomenko, the guy who really is pushing this, he's Russian. And so it's just not making the English-speaking world very much, but it's this idea that our timeline has been grossly changed, and entire decades, entire eras were inserted, things were moved around. It's a big can of worms, but I would look into the new chronology idea. I think it's fascinating. We've done 2 shows on it now. Sylvia Ivanoa, she is a translator who's worked with me to be able to get some of this stuff out there. So I'm proud of that. I think that's one of the most unique things that the HigherSide Chats has brought to the table amongst all the other things. So new chronology movement, if you search HigherSide Chats, new chronology, you'll get to a couple of the shows on that we've done. That's one of my favorites. And I think it's something that has a lot of evidence to it. It's easy to substantiate, and I think it'll blow a lot of minds, and it's something you haven't heard before.
And that's in like time travel, is that what you mean?
No, not time travel. More the idea that when this kind of gets into maybe the Jesuits are in control, but when the Vatican was being set up, that there's a formal chronology of history. There's a formal timeline of humanity. The idea is that they manipulated so much of it because there's entire dynasties, entire periods of time where there are no primary sources, and our sources all come from this group of Jesuit monks who basically wrote our chronology. Now, there's a lot of reasons why they would manipulate it. A lot of people say, well, how did we end up in this situation where a lot of the royal families of Europe were all one family? How did we end up like that, where people from different countries are second cousins and they're both the royal family? Shouldn't these people be French and these people be German or whatever it is? Well, the premise of new chronology is that the Vatican came in, these royal families, in conjunction with them, they rewrote history, backdated their own dynasties to justify their rule. And during the time of the Reformation period, that was a 150-year period of cleaning up all these records, going out across all the indigenous cultures and wiping out their records. Because you notice how they did a lot of that. When the Catholics went out and did their whole conversion thing, they destroyed all the records and religions of the Gnostics. Columbus came over here, wiped out Native Americans. We wiped, the Spanish came, the conquistadors came and wiped out people a little south from me. Why did this pattern happen? Well, this new chronology movement suggests that they formulated an official history that justified their own reign, their own rule, backdated it greatly, then went around the planet wiping off anyone who didn't have that history and instilling their own. And that's the history that we have today. It's a fascinating can of worms. I would suggest people dig into it, but that's, I mean, I know I didn't do it justice, but that's it in a nutshell.
Well, that puts a new dimension on the Winners Right history, eh?
Yeah, exactly. It is that to an extreme.
Mm. All right, legend. Just take a moment to direct the audience to your podcast, how they can get involved, how they can contribute to keep it alive and growing.
Sure. It's the HigherSideChats.com. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found, iTunes. I even throw it up on YouTube. And like I mentioned, the first hour is completely free, no advertising. I don't waste any time asking about the weather. We get right into this material. So one of the things I hate more than anything is I know I got to take a 10, 20-minute drive. I put on a podcast. It's supposed to be about the Hollow Earth. By the time my 20-minute drive is over, they've barely introduced the guests, and all they've talked about is what they had for lunch in their last, trip to Vegas. I don't care. So I never waste time like that. When you look at a show, it's going to get serious and it's going to get there quickly, and it's going to have to do with the topics it's described. So that's something I'm really, I take pride in. And then the second hour is for paid subscribers. I keep it as low as I can, $5. And then you get the second hour, the extended podcast. Again, no advertising. Again, no time wasted on anything that isn't the material. And I never wanted to be a subscriber show, but that's the only way to do it without advertising, to be able to pay your rent and not have to depend on the completely unreliable ups and down swings that you get if you're just on donations. But also I run Conspiracies, which is a clothing company that is mainly t-shirts that are based off of conspiratorial designs. And I'm transitioning that soon to HigherSide clothing, where we're going to have designs that are way more focused on particular episodes. And I've got some great artists that are coming up with some amazing stuff. I'm probably 30 days away from launching that, which is really exciting. And that's pretty much what I do.
Well, it's been a great chat. I think we haven't really done as many of the topics justice. I know a lot of people would be thinking on a few things mentioned, what the hell? But I really wanted to be a bit of a snapshot on some of the discussions that are happening in the alternative media and the conspiratorial world. I think it's important to explore it without having any solid belief or bias. I think we can entertain more than one idea, more than two ideas at once without needing to come to any conclusion. And just really using what the opportunity we do have to excite our mind, excite our heart with all that mystery and all that magic. I think it's absolutely important when we're sort of in this consciousness / matter / computer simulation / power matrix / energy factory world that we find ourselves in. So big kudos to you, mate, and I really appreciate you being on the program.
Oh, yeah, man. Thanks for having me here. Much appreciated. This was a blast.
Till next time.
Peace.